everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. Today is a follow-up to yesterday's live stream. Yesterday, I was talking about what is a closed herd? What does that mean? And what does it not mean? And during that talk, I mentioned the possibility of false positives in biosecurity testing. And the reason I mentioned that is because some people will get a false positive and then they completely lose faith in testing and think that there's no point in doing it because look at this, I just got this false positive and the goat is fine. And I want to talk about this from my own personal experience because I'm not just saying, yeah, keep testing just for the heck of it. Like I know how stressful it is to get a positive because that happened to us in 2005. So it was like the fourth or fifth goat we had purchased. We had actually purchased her in 2003. So she had been on our farm for 2 years. She had tested negative for CAE in the past. So when we tested her in 2005 and it came back positive, first of all, we were shocked and we were also very upset because the previous year we had used her milk. She fed her kids, but then we had also been milking her and used her milk to feed other kids. So we had quite a few does on our farm that had consumed her milk raw. And if she had CAE, those goats should have been positive. All of those goats were negative. She was the only one who was positive. So that was our first clue that this was probably not a real positive, but we wanted to be sure. So I called Washington State, which is where the test was done. And they said, yes, given what you've just told us, it definitely does sound like it's a false positive. And they said that they would redo the test without charging us for it. And so I pulled more blood, sent it in, and it also came back positive. And we tried a third time, and it also came back positive. So at that point, I said, okay, I am not going to keep sticking this goat every month to retest her for this test because for whatever reason she keeps testing positive. All of these kids that had consumed her milk last year tested negative. So let's do a PCR because PCR is way more expensive. That's why people don't start out with that one. It was, and I'm talking like 2005 numbers here. It was $25 for a PCR test where it was only $5 for the ELISA test. And so the ELISA test is the screening test that they have at Washington State, as well as a lot of other places now. Back in 2005, Washington State was the only one that had that test, and that's why we did it, because the AGID gets a lot of false negatives, so it's worthless. So if you do CAE testing, make sure your vet is sending it to a lab that's going to do the ELISA, not the AGID. So anyway, the ELISA is extremely sensitive. And they say that it is 99% accurate, which is about as accurate as any test can be. So after getting 3 positives, we decided to do the PCR. Not only did we do the PCR on the goat that tested positive, we also did the PCR on the 4 kids that had consumed her raw milk the year before, who are now, they're not kids anymore, they're a year old. And so we also tested them also with the PCR. And all 5 came back negative. So at that point, we felt very comfortable saying, okay, that was a false negative because, even if these kids hadn't tested positive on the ELISA, they surely, somebody, at least one of them would have tested positive on the PCR. And she did not test positive on the PCR. So that was where we felt like, okay, she should be negative now. And we continued testing. And why I am so glad that we continued testing is because through the years, we have had a lot of kids. We've had about 775 kids. We obviously have to sell most of those because we don't have a farm that big. And so through the years, I have had people contact me years after a goat was bought and gone through 2 or 3 homes, and say, this goat has CAE. And it's like, okay, well, she's been through like 2 other owners since I sold her. And here are the test results where I can show you that her mother and every other goat on this farm has tested negative for that disease. And crazy enough, I even had someone contact me once because the daughter of a goat I sold tested positive for CAE. And it's like, that goat was never on my farm. Like, and I sold her mother when she was a kid. So who knows where that mother went, after I sold her. And, if she picked up CAE and gave it to her kid, or if her kid picked it up somewhere else. But again, I was super happy to have those test results and to be able to show those to the person who contacted me and say, look, our herd has tested negative forever. So if that goat has CAE, they got it from somebody else. Because we have now, that was 2005, it's 2025. We've had 20 years of negative tests. And the really interesting thing is that goat that had the false positive in 2005, she actually lived to be 16 and a half years old. She, that was the longest lived doe that we ever had on our farm. And she was super healthy all the way to the very end. In fact, when she was 13, 14 years old, she looked better than she did when she was in her prime, nursing kids, because when she was nursing, she was under a lot of stress and she was a bucket buster. She was a great milker. And so, once she was retired, she's just hanging out in the pasture and, enjoying the good life. And she looked fabulous. And, at the age of 16 and a half, she didn't come in one night and we went out looking for her, and it looked like she just curled up and fell asleep. So that's kind of how I'd love to see all of my goats' lives play out. So anyway, that is why, if you get a false positive, it doesn't mean that you should stop testing. No test is 100%, but and that's why you want the whole herd test. That's why you don't want to just test a couple of goats here and there. You want everybody tested because it is a screening test. And so these are all very contagious diseases. So once one has it, they're going to pass it along to everybody else. Like I mentioned in yesterday's video, I have worked with a lot of people who have found themselves with goats that test positive for these diseases. And one of our Goats 365 members a few years ago had a goat that suddenly had an abscess, and she had it tested. It came back as CL. And so at that point, she tested all of her goats. Half the herd was infected with CL. And she had some really, really challenging decisions that she had to make with those animals. And it was really tough. And she had no idea where it came from, because she had her goats for about 4 years. She had bought them from multiple sources. And at this point, because they'd all been commingling, she was getting positives from a variety of goats. So she couldn't say like, oh, well, all the goats that came from this farm are the ones that are testing positive, because they had already given it to each other. It was passing around already. So it's much better if you test, so you want to buy from herds that have a long history of whole herd negative testing. And then you want to test the goats after they get on your farm. Once they're old enough, you want them, most people say they should be at least 6 months old, but one pathologist said once that it's better if it's been 6 months after they were weaned. That way you won't have any of mom's antibodies interfering with the test results. So the more you test, the more you know that you've got negative animals. And the cool thing about, having a whole herd that has tested negative for CL is that whenever one of my goats gets any kind of an abscess, I'm not freaking out going, oh my gosh, is it CL? I know it's probably not. I still get them cultured and they all come back negative. But in the meantime, I'm not losing sleep worrying about whether or not it is CL. So I feel like testing is always a win ultimately, because it's better to know than not know what you're dealing with. And I can only imagine what I can only imagine what it would feel like if, you were selling goats and suddenly had somebody come back and say, yeah, so those 3 goats I bought from you last year or last month all tested positive for this disease. That would be a horrible way to find out that you had a disease in your herd. So anyway, if you've got any questions, please feel free to post in the comments section below and we'll get back to you. Bye for now.